Hello everyone. In this chapter, we're going to talk about the idea of a rhythm. Now, I'd like to start with a little bit of a explanation. I'm not going to require you guys to know everything about rhythm and music notation, since I realize this class is music appreciation and not music theory or class piano, for example. But what I would like to for you to know is basic rhythmic concepts. What is rhythm? How is rhythm used in music to create a certain image, to paint a certain picture? So, with this said, let's begin. So, what is rhythm? Rhythm is the organization of time in music, and it's divided into long and short spans. This is applicable to both sounds and silence. Now, let me give you an example of that. For example, if we were to play a piece such as Mary Had a Little Lamb, right, which would go something like that. And so on and so forth, we would pretty much hear that most of the notes that I have played are equal in length, but some of them aren't. Some of them are longer, right? So what ends up happening, the question that arises is, how can a musician know that? Do they just know it by listening to it and by passing it orally, Aurally, from a person to person? Or is there some type of notation where they are able to tell, okay, in this particular place I have to hang on to this note a little bit longer, I have to make this note longer. And that's where rhythm comes in. Because just like when we use seconds, for example, or minutes to measure time, we use the idea of a beat to measure time in music. And the beat is something that's not an exact length. That's the difference between seconds or minutes and an actual beat. A beat is set up at the very beginning. It could be longer, it could be shorter. You could have 3 or 4 pieces of music with different beats in each one of them, lengthwise. But the key is for the beat to stay consistent. Once you started a piece, that beat has to stay consistent. So once you committed to a certain length for that beat as a composer, then it has to stay consistent throughout. Most of the time, there's times when that's not the case, but don't worry about it for now. So let's say that a beat is something very simple. Like for example, let's take this. It's if I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Each one of these claps can be considered a beat. Okay. Now I can have, let's say, a rhythm where the beat is faster, where it's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, what happened is, in the second time, even though it was a faster beat, it was still a beat. But you notice that they stayed consistent. The first time, all of my beats were consistent with one another. The second time, all my beats were consistent to one another. Of course, the second time was faster than the first time, but that's okay. As I said, I'm allowed to do that as long as I stay consistent after I set up the beat at the very beginning. So, the beat is important because it is used to measure the length of every musical note. As we know, when I talked about Mary Had a Little Lamb, the piece that I've just played, the question was, how do I know how much to hold every note? Well, there's a certain writing. There's the musical writing that tells you that. And then we use the beats to measure the length of these particular notes. And based on how long these notes are, we give them specific name. So a note that will be 1 beat long, then it's called a quarter note. A note that's 2 beats long will be called a half note. And then a note that's 4 beats long will be called a whole note. Now I'm gonna go back to my keyboard here and I'm gonna try to represent that. So I'm gonna set up my 4-beat pattern as I did before. I'm gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. As you've noticed, what I just did, I played a single note which lasted for 4 beats, and that's a whole note. Okay? Now, let's see if I can play some half notes. I'm gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I've just played a group of half notes. How did I know it was half notes? Well, I played on beat 1 and then I held the note on beat 2. So altogether, every note is going to last for 2 beats. Now, let's try to have the quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So what I have over here is I have a note per each beat, which gave me a quarter note. So when we're listening to music, if we hear periods of times where we're hearing a note but we're not hearing any enunciation of that particular note, any hit on that particular note, we're just hearing the note being held for a period of time, that we know that that particular note will be a half note, a whole note, or a longer note. So that's what creates the rhythm, because when we combine long and short notes, we get music, and we get music that's exciting. So rhythm is a very, very important part of the musical language. Also, the beat can measure the periods of silence in a piece of music. As I said before, the silence is equally important with the notes, because having silence really gives more power to the pitches that you're using, to the notes that you're using. So, in order to make sure that the silence happens in relation with the musical notes, we also measure this period of silence. So if I have a silence that lasts for 1 beat, I call that a rest, by the way. In music, we call periods of silence, we call those rests. R-E-S-T-S. So the quarter note rest is going to be 1 beat, the half note rest will be 2 beats, while the whole note rest will last for 4 beats. Okay, now look at on your left side of your screen. Don't worry about it. It's I'm not gonna quiz you. I know it looks kind of scary, but I just want to show you a little bit of a I guess of a piece of music, and kind of see what these elements are, just the rhythmic elements. So I want to talk a little bit about the idea of a measure or a bar. They mean the same thing. I use measure a lot, but I guess your book uses bar. It's pretty much the same thing, so don't let that confuse you. But it represents a smaller unit containing a certain number of beats, 2, 3, or 4. In traditional music writing, each musical piece contains a number of measures. Usually it's a large number of measures. Now, you might ask, what's the use of that? Well, let's think about it. On a piece that's about 5 minutes long, or 10 minutes long, or whatever, we probably have, a few hundred beats, right? Because if you think about it, that piece is actually, taking a lot of notes. It's going to take, it's going to feature a lot of notes, a lot of beats. So when you're counting, you're going to have to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You get to 100, 200, 300. It's really hard to, number one, keep track of the beats, and number two, count the beats. So what we end up having is we're splitting every musical piece in a smaller section, and that particular section is called a measure or a bar, and that contains only a certain number of beats. So in this particular case, we have a section that contains 3 beats. This would be beat number 1. I'm sorry. Let me go back here. This would be beat number 1 where my cursor is. This would be number 2. This would be number 3. So I know that in this measure I have 3 beats. Now, in this measure, I also have 3 beats, 1, 2, and 3. So pretty much, if you're gonna look every measure, it's going to contain 3 beats from this particular example. So when I count, I just count 1, 2, 3. Then I'm done with this measure. There's a bar line, and that's what tells me that the measure is over. And I go to the next measure, and I start counting at 1 again. 1, 2, 3, bar line. 1, 2, 3, bar line, so on and so forth. Okay. And another important concept is the meter. And the meter is just the idea of how many beats can be found in each measure. Um, the number of beats is not random. It should be either duple or triple. And duple, it means if it's based by 2. So you can have, for example, 2 beats in a measure, 4 beats in a measure, 8 beats in a measure. And then the triple, if it's a multiple of 3, like you can have 3 beats in a measure, you could have 6 beats in a measure, 9 beats in a measure, so on and so forth. So, and why that's important is because in the measure, not every beat is important. Usually the beat number 1, such as, I'm sorry about the PowerPoint problem, beat number 1, such as this one, is going to be the strongest beat in the measure. It's called the downbeat. And then we have the beat number 2 and beat number 3 that aren't as strong. Okay, so moving along, if there's any question about the rhythm, please feel free to email me, and I will respond to it for sure. As I said, don't worry too much about it. I just want you to get some broad concepts, since this is not really a music theory class that we're doing, but I do want to make sure that we're understanding the concept a little bit. So, moving along from rhythm, we're going to talk about the tempo. And the tempo is merely the speed of the piece, the speed at which every beat progresses. Like, we can have different tempo. Like, for example, let's go back to Mary Had a Little Lamb here. So here's Mary Had a Little Lamb played fairly slowly. Okay, now here is, in comparison, Mary Had a Little Lamb that's played faster. I'm fairly certain that all of you have heard a difference of speed, right? I mean, it's the same piece, it's the same song that's played twice. One time is slower, one time is faster. Which one's right, which one's wrong? Well, we don't know, because we don't know how fast this particular piece was supposed to be played at the very beginning. But usually, at the beginning of a piece, there's going to be a marking that's going to tell us how fast we must play it. And that marking, again, it's not an exact science. It's not like math where it has to be a certain number of beats per minute or whatever. But sometimes it is, but most of the time it isn't. It's more like a general idea. Like we have 3 broad categories of tempo. We have the slow, we have the medium, and we have the fast. And within this particular categories, we also have a variety of speeds within these 3 categories. So again, how do we know how fast or how slow we need to play? Well, the composer, if they're a good composer, they're going to specify that at the beginning of the piece. At least they're going to give you an idea, such as, okay, play this slow. How slow? It's up to you. Slow for me might be different than slow for some other performer, but it can be medium or it can be fast. It has to be slow, so it has to give the impression of a slow. And these particular markings are Italian words. And in your book at page number 19, you're going to find them. So please look at them and study them, because there's going to be some assignment on the writing assignment about the tempo. So you don't have to memorize all of them, but I would like you to know, for example, that largo or lento is not a fast tempo, but rather slow, and the opposite. So the reason why we use the Italian words is because music has started in Italy, where it was one of the first places where it started and where it was really developed. So tradition has it that it was first Italian that was used, and it carried on until today. Okay, so we are going to be done with the rhythm, and then we're going to move on to the melody for the next presentation. But as I said before, please feel free to send me an email if there's any questions about this particular lecture. Thank you very much.